There's a truth most men never hear until it's already too late. It's not because they're weak, unintelligent, or incapable. It's because no one ever teaches them how respect quietly rises or slowly disappears inside a relationship. Most men spend years believing that love means giving more, sacrificing more, forgiving more, and constantly proving their devotion. They think that if they become endlessly patient, endlessly available, and endlessly understanding, they'll create the perfect relationship. But reality doesn't always work that way. Sometimes, the very things a man believes will strengthen a relationship are the same things that slowly destroy the respect holding it together. Welcome back to Secrets Inside the Mind. If you're new here, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because every video on this channel is designed to help you understand psychology, relationships, confidence, and human behavior on a much deeper level. And if you've ever felt confused by someone's sudden change in attitude, if you've ever wondered why someone who once admired you slowly became distant, or if you've ever asked yourself, "What did I do wrong?" then this video may answer questions you've carried for years. Because attraction rarely disappears overnight, respect fades first, then attraction quietly follows. Today we're breaking down 10 things a man should never do if he wants to protect his confidence, his boundaries, and ultimately the quality of his relationships. These lessons aren't about controlling women. They aren't about manipulation. They're about understanding how human psychology responds to confidence, consistency, and self-respect. Because the strongest relationships are never built on fear. They're built on mutual respect. So stay with me until the end, because each lesson builds on the one before it, and the final point may completely change how you think about relationships forever. And before we begin, write one word in the comments: respect. Not for me, for yourself, because everything starts there. Let's begin. Number 1. Never forgive betrayal twice. This may be one of the hardest lessons a man ever learns. Betrayal rarely begins with one mistake. It begins long before that with small decisions, hidden conversations, broken promises, ignored boundaries, and choices repeated again and again. By the time cheating actually happens, dozens of opportunities to choose differently have already passed. That's why betrayal is never simply an accident. It's a decision. Many men desperately want to believe otherwise. They tell themselves she was confused. She made a mistake. She was going through something difficult. She didn't mean it. And because they love her, they convince themselves forgiveness alone can erase what happened. But here's something psychology repeatedly shows. Trust doesn't disappear because of one event. It disappears because certainty disappears. Once certainty is gone, every future interaction becomes filled with doubt. The relationship changes, not because someone wants it to, because human nature makes it impossible to forget what happened. Many men think forgiving immediately proves emotional maturity. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it simply shows fear of losing someone who already crossed a line. There's a huge difference. Strong boundaries aren't punishment. They're protection. Not only protection from another person's actions, protection from abandoning your own standards. A man who refuses to protect his own boundaries quietly teaches everyone around him exactly how much disrespect he'll tolerate. And people almost always believe what your actions teach them, not what your words say. Imagine someone borrowing your car. They crash it, you replace it, then they crash it again. Would you keep handing them the keys forever? Probably not. Relationships work much the same way. Every repeated betrayal slowly trains both people to believe that consequences don't really exist. Eventually, respect disappears, not because forgiveness is wrong, but because standards no longer exist. Now, does that mean people can never change? Of course not. Human beings can change. People mature. People grow. People become better. But genuine change is demonstrated over time through consistent action, not requested through emotional promises made. Immediately after being caught, anyone can apologize, anyone can cry, anyone can promise. Consistency is much harder. Character reveals itself through repeated behavior, not repeated apologies. One of the greatest signs of confidence is knowing where your line exists before someone crosses it. Because if you don't know your standards, life will constantly negotiate them for you. Strong people don't enjoy walking away. They simply understand that some decisions permanently change the relationship, and protecting your peace is never something you should apologize for. Now here's something even more interesting. Many men confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. Those are not the same thing. You can forgive someone internally, release the anger, learn the lesson, wish them well, and still decide they no longer belong in your future. That isn't bitterness. That's wisdom. Holding resentment keeps you trapped. But removing someone who repeatedly disrespects you creates space for healthier relationships later. Real confidence isn't shown by how much pain you can tolerate. It's shown by what you're unwilling to tolerate anymore. And that leads perfectly into the second mistake many men make without even realizing it. Number 2. Never ask permission to live your own life. Healthy relationships require communication. But communication is completely different from surrendering your independence. Some men slowly begin asking permission for everything. Can I go see my friends? Can I accept this job? Can I travel? Can I start this business? Can I spend time with my family? Little by little, their confidence starts depending on someone else's approval. At first, it feels harmless, even respectful. But eventually, something changes. Instead of two adults sharing life together, one person becomes the decision maker. The other becomes the follower. Psychologically, confidence is deeply connected to autonomy. Human beings naturally respect people who take responsibility for their own decisions, not because they're controlling, but because they demonstrate stability. A confident man informs, he communicates, he listens, he considers his partner's feelings, but ultimately, he still accepts responsibility for his own choices. That's leadership. Leadership isn't domination. Leadership is accountability. Imagine someone asks you a simple question during dinner. What do you think? Instead of answering, you immediately look at your partner, waiting for permission before speaking. That tiny moment communicates far more than words ever could. Confidence doesn't always reveal itself through grand gestures. Often it reveals itself through very small habits repeated every day. The strongest relationships are built between two complete individuals, not one complete individual, and one person searching for permission to exist. When you respect your own decisions, other people naturally begin respecting them too, and that confidence becomes the foundation for everything else that follows. Now let's continue. Number 3. Never go broke trying to impress her. Here's one of the biggest traps modern dating has created. Many men believe attraction can be purchased, not directly, but through expensive dinners, luxury vacations, designer gifts, constant surprises, and a lifestyle they can barely afford. Social media only makes this belief stronger. Everywhere you look, relationships appear filled with extravagant gestures, expensive experiences, and endless displays of wealth. So a man starts thinking, maybe that's what I need to do. He spends beyond his means. He empties his savings. He puts purchases on credit cards. He sacrifices long-term stability for short-term approval. At first, it feels exciting. She's smiling. She's impressed. Everything seems perfect. But psychology teaches us something important. People value what feels sustainable, not what feels forced. When your lifestyle becomes a performance, eventually the performance becomes impossible to maintain. And once it stops, everything changes. Because if your value depends on what you provide financially, then your identity becomes tied to your wallet instead of your character. That's a dangerous place to build any relationship. Generosity is attractive. Recklessness isn't. A confident man enjoys giving because he chooses to. A desperate man gives because he fears losing someone. Those two motivations create completely different relationships. Imagine planting a tree. Would you spend all your energy decorating the leaves while ignoring the roots? Of course not. Without strong roots, the tree eventually falls. Your financial stability is one of those roots. Protecting it isn't selfish, it's responsible. The strongest providers aren't the ones who spend the most. They're the ones who create security that lasts. Real confidence isn't saying yes to every expensive request. Sometimes it's calmly saying, "Not right now," and being perfectly comfortable with that answer. Because if someone only stays while you're spending, they were never truly investing in you. A healthy relationship should improve your future, not quietly bankrupt it. Never confuse financial sacrifice with emotional value. They're not the same thing. Number 4. Never allow yourself to be controlled. Control rarely enters a relationship dramatically. It usually arrives wearing the mask of concern. Who are you texting? Send me your location. Why didn't you answer immediately? Who liked your picture? Why are you going there? Individually, these questions may seem harmless, but over time, they can slowly transform into constant surveillance. The relationship becomes less about trust and more about permission. This doesn't mean privacy should replace honesty. Healthy relationships absolutely require openness. But openness freely given is very different from control demanded. Think about the healthiest friendships you've ever had. Did you constantly monitor one another? Probably not. Trust reduces the need. Relationships work the same way. When trust grows, control naturally becomes less necessary. When control grows, trust often becomes weaker. Many people mistakenly believe control proves love. In reality, control usually proves fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of betrayal, fear of uncertainty. But fear doesn't disappear through more control. It usually grows stronger. A confident person sets boundaries. An insecure person creates restrictions. Those are completely different things. Boundaries describe your own behavior. Control tries to manage someone else's. For example, a healthy boundary says, "If dishonesty becomes a pattern, I will leave." Control says, "You're not allowed to talk to anyone." One protects your values. The other attempts to eliminate uncertainty. And uncertainty can never be eliminated completely. Strong relationships aren't built because one partner watches every move. They're built because both people consistently choose honesty. If someone must constantly supervise you, respect slowly disappears. Not because they're evil, because admiration rarely survives constant management. Nobody wants to become another person's full-time project. Mutual trust creates freedom. Mutual respect protects that freedom. And mature relationships require both. Number 5. Never lie just to keep the peace. Many men don't lie because they're malicious. They lie because they're afraid. Afraid of conflict, afraid of arguments, afraid she'll become upset. So they tell little white lies. Everything's fine. No, that didn't bother me. I love it. You're right. Over time, those tiny lies begin stacking on top of one another, until, eventually, nobody knows what's actually true anymore. Here's something fascinating about human psychology. People usually detect emotional inconsistency long before they detect factual inconsistency. She may not know exactly what's wrong, but she'll often sense something doesn't match. Your words say one thing, your body says another, your tone says something else. That disconnect slowly weakens trust. Honesty doesn't require cruelty. You can speak difficult truths with kindness. You can disagree respectfully. You can express disappointment calmly. Real maturity isn't avoiding uncomfortable conversations. It's having them without destroying the relationship. Think about building a house. Would you rather discover a small crack immediately, or ignore it until the entire foundation starts collapsing? Most people would rather fix the crack early. Relationships work exactly the same way. Small, honest conversations prevent enormous future problems. The strongest couples aren't the ones who never disagree. They're the ones who know disagreement doesn't threaten the relationship itself. Confidence allows truth. Fear creates performance. And eventually, performance becomes exhausting. When someone knows your words consistently match your actions, your credibility grows. People begin trusting what you say because your behavior repeatedly confirms it. Trust isn't created through perfect answers. It's created through consistent honesty, even when honesty feels uncomfortable. Number 6. Never abandon your standards simply to avoid conflict. One of the greatest misunderstandings about boundaries is believing they exist to control other people. They don't. They exist to define who you are. Many men slowly lower every standard because they fear losing someone. First, they ignore small disrespect, then bigger disrespect. Eventually, they're accepting situations they once promised themselves they'd never tolerate. Why? Because walking away feels painful. But here's the irony. Ignoring your standards usually creates even more pain later. Imagine owning a house. If someone keeps entering without knocking, eventually your home no longer feels like your own. Boundaries protect emotional space, the same way walls protect physical space. Without them, everything eventually becomes chaotic. Standards aren't demands, they're decisions. They're quiet reminders of what kind of life you're willing to build. A man who knows his standards doesn't need to shout. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't constantly repeat himself. He simply acts consistently. If someone repeatedly crosses important boundaries, he responds accordingly, calmly, clearly, without drama. That's emotional strength, because strength isn't measured by volume. It's measured by consistency. Some people will test your boundaries, not because they hate you, because everyone unconsciously learns how others respond. Every relationship develops patterns. If disrespect consistently produces no consequences, disrespect often increases. If honesty consistently receives appreciation, honesty usually grows. Human beings naturally adapt to the environments they're given, which means your standards quietly shape the quality of every relationship you build. Remember, boundaries aren't walls keeping good people out. They're filters helping the right people stay. And here's something worth remembering. The right person won't admire you because you tolerate everything. They'll admire you because your values remain steady even when they're difficult to maintain. Because integrity becomes visible precisely when compromise seems easier. That realization brings us to one of the most important lessons of all. Sometimes, protecting a relationship doesn't begin by changing the other person. It begins by refusing to abandon yourself. Now we've reached the final 4 lessons. These ideas are less about what you do in a relationship and more about the kind of man you become while you're in one. Because at the end of the day, the quality of your relationships will rarely rise above the quality of the life you build for yourself. Number 7. Never choose a relationship over your purpose. One of the most common mistakes men make isn't loving too much. It's forgetting who they were before the relationship began. At first, everything feels exciting. You want to spend every free moment together. You answer every message immediately. You rearrange your schedule. You skip workouts. You postpone personal goals. You tell yourself it's temporary. But temporary habits often become permanent lifestyles. Weeks become months. Months become years. And one day you look in the mirror and realize you've slowly abandoned the ambitions that once gave your life direction. Purpose is more than a career. It's the mission that gets you out of bed. It's the work that challenges you. It's the habits that make tomorrow better than today. Without purpose, a relationship slowly becomes your entire identity. And that's an enormous amount of pressure to place on another human being. No healthy relationship should become someone's entire world. Healthy love expands your life. It doesn't replace it. Think about the people you admire most. They usually have something larger than themselves they're committed to. A business, a craft, a profession, a dream, a mission. That sense of direction creates confidence because it reminds them that their happiness isn't dependent on another person's mood. Ironically, that's often what makes someone more attractive. Not because they're ignoring their partner, but because they're building a meaningful life worth sharing. When your life has direction, you bring energy into the relationship. When your life has no direction, you unconsciously expect the relationship to provide the meaning you're missing. That's a burden no partner can carry forever. The strongest relationships happen when 2 people walk beside each other, not when one person carries the other's entire sense of purpose. So love deeply, support fully, but never abandon the life that made you who you are. Because the person you become is ultimately the greatest gift you bring into any relationship. Number 8. Never sacrifice your responsibilities for temporary emotions. A man's reputation is built on something incredibly simple: his word. Can people depend on him? Does he follow through? Does he finish what he starts? These qualities matter far more than dramatic declarations of love. Imagine you've promised a client you'll finish an important project. You've committed to helping your family. You've made plans with close friends weeks in advance. Then suddenly someone says, "Cancel everything. I need you right now." Real emergencies happen. Life isn't always predictable. But if you repeatedly abandon your responsibilities whenever emotions become intense, people begin noticing a pattern. Eventually, your promises stop carrying weight. Reliability isn't glamorous. It rarely gets attention, but it's one of the strongest indicators of maturity. Strong people organize their priorities. They communicate clearly. They solve problems without creating new ones. That doesn't mean work always comes before relationships. It means your commitments matter. A relationship should fit into a well-structured life, not replace the structure completely, because every promise you keep strengthens your confidence. Every unnecessary promise you break quietly weakens it. When your actions consistently match your words, people begin trusting you instinctively. Trust isn't built through speeches. It's built through consistency. Day after day, year after year. That's what real reliability looks like. Number 9. Never lose your individuality just to fit into someone else's world. One of the easiest ways to slowly disappear inside a relationship is by becoming a copy of your partner. You start watching only the shows they enjoy, listening only to their music, following only their interests, joining every hobby, agreeing with every opinion. At first, it feels supportive. Eventually, it becomes something else. You stop bringing anything uniquely yours into the relationship. Healthy relationships thrive on shared experiences, but they also thrive on individuality. Curiosity survives when both people continue growing independently. Imagine two trees growing beside each other. Their branches may overlap, their roots may share the same soil, but each tree still grows toward the sunlight in its own direction. Neither tree becomes the other. Relationships work the same way. Support each other's passions, celebrate each other's successes, encourage each other's dreams, but never erase your own identity in the process. People remain interesting because they continue growing, not because they become identical. Keep reading, keep learning, keep creating, keep improving. Keep developing the parts of yourself that existed long before the relationship started. Because when two complete individuals come together, the relationship becomes stronger, not weaker. Mutual admiration grows when both people continue becoming better versions of themselves. Your individuality isn't a threat to love. It's one of the reasons healthy love lasts. Number 10. Never make permanent decisions while overwhelmed by emotion. Life occasionally places us in moments where emotions run incredibly high. Fear, excitement, pressure, guilt, hope. Those moments often feel like they demand immediate action. But some decisions deserve patience, whether it's signing legal documents, making financial commitments, accepting lifelong responsibilities, or making choices that permanently affect your future. Take time. Think clearly. Gather facts. Emotion isn't the enemy. Impulsive decision-making is. Wise people understand something many others forget. Pressure creates urgency, but urgency doesn't always create wisdom. One calm day of careful thinking can prevent years of regret. Protecting your future isn't selfish. It's responsible. Confidence isn't making fast decisions. Confidence is making informed decisions. No one should shame you for wanting clarity before accepting lifelong responsibility. Maturity asks questions. Immaturity fears asking them. A stable future is rarely built through rushed choices. It's built through thoughtful ones. Final thoughts now. Look back at every lesson we've covered today. On the surface, they may seem completely different. One talks about boundaries, another about honesty, another about purpose, another about responsibility. But underneath them all is one simple principle. Never abandon yourself to keep someone else. That's the thread connecting every lesson. Respect doesn't disappear because someone suddenly changes. More often, respect fades because small compromises slowly become habits. You ignore one boundary. You silence one opinion. You cancel one commitment. You abandon one goal. None of those choices seem significant by themselves, but together, they quietly reshape the person you become. The strongest relationships aren't built by perfect people. They're built by people who remain authentic, who communicate honestly, who protect their values, who continue growing individually while building something meaningful together. Real confidence isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need constant validation. It quietly says, "This is who I am. These are my values, and I won't betray them even for someone I love." Ironically, that's often what creates the deepest respect, because people trust consistency, they trust integrity, they trust someone whose actions continue matching their principles over time. So before you leave this video, ask yourself one question. Which lesson challenged you the most? Not because it's easy, but because it revealed something you've been avoiding. Growth begins with awareness. Awareness becomes action. Action becomes habit. And habits eventually become character. Remember, you don't become a stronger man overnight. You become stronger every time you choose discipline over impulse, truth over comfort, purpose over distraction, and self-respect over approval. If this video gave you a new perspective, leave a comment below and tell me which lesson stood out to you the most. Your insight might help someone else who's reading through the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss future videos from Secrets Inside the Mind. Thank you for watching. And remember, the goal isn't to become someone women admire. The goal is to become a man who never has to abandon himself to be loved. I'll see you in the next video.